Today our subject is parables from Buddha. So I would like to begin by quoting two ancient Sanskrit verses which depict the picture, the physical appearance of Buddha. It is from an 11th century classical Sanskrit work. It is called Avadana Kalpalata. That book deals with the previous life cycles of Buddha. Gautama Buddha, who was born in Nepal in the 6th century BC, was not the first Buddha, it was the last Buddha. To be precise, that was the 544th incarnation of a spiritual phenomenon that went through hundreds of life cycles, which eventually became Buddha, who was born as Buddha, as a prince, the son of a king in Nepal. So, this book, Avadana Kalpalata, deals with Buddha's previous life cycles. And it was written by a great Sanskrit poet. His name was Kshemendra, who was living in Kashmir, today's India, in the 11th century AD. It is a well-known composition that depicts Buddha's previous lives. It's very interesting. Some of the parables that we are going to discuss indirectly depict Buddha's own evolution. How Buddha went through different life cycles and eventually was born as the enlightened one. So the verses are these. Dirghadhyana nimira lochana yudam nisambhrama brulatam nasavamsha nishakta Kandakanakachatrobamalalikam Nirbhushayada Karnapashalilidam Vyalambi Bahubrudum Bauddham Rupam Aveksha Nirvrudi Abhut Nischetananam Api. Well, the meaning of the conclusion is Nirvridihi Abhut Nischetananam Api. What means, if you think of Buddha, if you meditate on Buddha, even those who are spiritually in a state of darkness will have an inner spiritual ecstasy. Nirvriddhi means a kind of an experience of inner ecstasy. So Nischetananam api nirvriddhihi abhut means even to those who are spiritually not awakened, the thought and contemplation on Buddha and his parables will create a spiritual ecstasy. So that is the meaning here. And of course, the earlier versions, his figure, which is there is an indescribable peace on his face. So that peace will be transmitted to those who think of Buddha and who read and contemplate on the spiritual significance of his parables. The second verse is much more profound. Utsarya papa vipulam timiravataram sadhya prakirna karuna kirana prakasha doshapakascha paritapaharaschcha kopi sanmargamadishati buddha sahasra rashmi. So the sweet and the peaceful glance of the blessed Buddha will give us a shower of immortality, and it cools down our heart and mind, calms down our anxiety, and even a person who is very, very primitive in his spiritual life will be liberated by contemplating on Buddha and his message. These are two very famous, a bit of a, highly metaphorical, but a lot of figures of speech are included in this well-known book, the Avadana Kalpalata. So you can imagine it doesn't deal with the story of the lifeline, the everyday activities of a person. It deals with the preceding life cycles of a great spiritual man. So a lot of imagination, a lot of apparent exaggeration you'll find here. Now, to understand Buddha's message and his parables, we have to keep a few things in mind. Then only you'll be able to fully appreciate the spiritual significance of stories. In this story, sometimes a rich man appears who eventually realizes the emptiness of his prosperity. A woman, a mother who has lost her child comes to Buddha and becomes spiritually enlightened, listening to his advices. And he doesn't give this instruction directly. It is a very effective way of teaching that we eventually will describe that. So Buddha appears on one end of the spiritual spectrum of India. You can see historically there are three major prominent spiritual personalities who defined India's spiritual evolution from 6th century BC to 19th century AD. That is roughly around 2,400 years. At the one end of this line, you find Buddha, 6th century BC. He was an earlier elder contemporary of Heraclitus, Empedocles, and some of the prominent Greek thinkers. Of course, he was a predecessor. In a way, Buddha's teachings contain many ideas which later you find in the teachings of the Greek sophists, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and other. Thales, the first well-known Greek historian belonging to 6th century BC, you find. So there was a lot of intellectual, cultural communication in those days. So one end you find Buddha. 19th century represents the age of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. In between stands Shankaracharya. So what was the special significance of Buddha's times? It's very interesting. When Buddha came, Vedic religion, or what we call the earlier part of Vedantic tradition, the ritualistic Vedic culture had become very, very degenerate. You can find one of the parables deal with this phenomenon. People who practiced rituals, elaborate rituals, for a long time, and very often even including animal sacrifices, which Buddha condemned. You can find this story, how he condemned animal sacrifices. Were very common in those days. To give an example, one parable, Buddha is walking under the burning sun one day in the country of the Magadha, that is today's Bihar state. And suddenly he finds a shepherd who is driving a huge number of sheep and maybe cattle also, cowherds also. And he asked them, "Where are you going?" And the shepherd said, "Well, I have to take this, I have to drive this sheep to a place where a big ritual is going on. The ritual is being performed by a great emperor, Bimbisara. Now, what are these animals meant for?" He said, "These animals will be sacrificed." You find some of the ritualistic orthodoxy of these early Hindu traditions very strongly represent the orthodoxy of the Pharisees and Sadducees among the Jewish orthodoxy in the 1st century BC, you find. where there are many close similarities. Of course, this was not true Vedic religion. This was a time when Vedic religion, not Vedanta, Vedic religion had become very old, and they have already become somewhat corrupted to mechanical practices. So there was a tiny lamp that was moving slowly. It could not walk properly. It was limping. So Buddha requested permission for the shepherd. Can I carry this poor animal? I think it's finding it very difficult to walk. And the shepherd agreed, and Buddha carried this lamp in his arms and reached the place where the ritual was going on. And then Bimbisara came to know a holy man has come to the place, the venue where the big ritual was being performed. Thousands of people gathered. So the emperor came and respected him, showed his respect. Then the Buddha gave one request. Well, you are going to sacrifice these sheep, and this lamb is limping. So perhaps could you sacrifice me in place of the lamb? So Buddha was not trying to exchange with the death of his son. Buddha was willing to exchange his own life in place of the lamb. The emperor was shocked, and that day he gave up animal sacrifices. And it is said that he was the first, historically speaking, the first ruler in the world who opened hospitals for animals. Suppose the originator of veterinary science. So this is the first time in the 6th century BC he started. He banned animal sacrifices. He imposed vegetarianism, which is not necessarily a very spiritual thing, because Buddha himself was a non-vegetarian. Eventually you're going to find out. But the point is, this is the story of Buddha. He was willing to sacrifice his own life in exchange for the life of the little animal, the lamb. So this was Buddha. So you find in his parables many such very, very interesting, extraordinary method of teaching the subtlest and most profound spiritual truths in the language of simple parables. And he did not speak in Sanskrit as the great philosophers of India in those days were doing. He spoke, he preached, he did his sermons in a language which is called Magadhi Prakrit. Prakrit is an umbrella term for a large number of corrupted or unrefined forms of Sanskrit. So Prakrit has its own grammatical system, and in fact those of you who are familiar with Mukundamala, the king Kulasekara Alvar, he was credited with having written the most profound grammatical works on Prakrit grammar called Stiganta Samrajyam, Subandha Samrajyam. Anyway, I'm not going to those details. The point is, he preached and spoke in the common man's language, so to speak. It was like a great bishop in medieval England preaching in English, which was considered to be totally unacceptable. You have to speak in Latin. People were sacrificed, they were persecuted, they were excommunicated, they were sometimes burned at stake for translating or preaching biblical truths in the vernacular, even in the 14th, 15th, 13th, 12th centuries in Europe. So something like that. Buddha refused to speak in the language of the elite. He spoke in the language of the common man in the street. And the place where he lived and traveled and moved about, most of his lifetime was in Magadha country, which is a very big empire, which in its widest dimensions extended all the way from Sri Lanka to Central Asia, and from Burma to the whole of Afghanistan, up to Persian border, Iranian border, which is a huge geographical region in his glorious days. So that was the language he spoke. Magadhi Prakrit. Prakrit has got many diverse forms. It is an umbrella term for all those corrupted or unrefined forms of Sanskrit. So now I'm just going to some of his parables. Before that, a few words about the personality of Buddha. Buddha itself means the enlightened one, the awakened one. And the Sanskrit root Buddh itself means awakening, to wake up from spiritual darkness, waking to spiritual light. That's what it means. So, and one important aspect of Buddha's teaching was that he did not preach a creator God. He did not ask us to perform a certain ritual, a certain set of rituals. He did not give us a mode of worship. He did not ask us to pray, to surrender our spiritual freedom to an anthropomorphic dictator, creator God. Rather, he wanted us to live a spiritual life in this world, in our words, in our actions, and moreover, in our attitude towards others. So he used the compassion. It's an important word that occurs again and again in Buddhist teachings and Buddhist philosophy. So, to understand the parables, we should know a little about the underlying philosophy. As I mentioned, Buddha did not preach a dogma or the teachings of a particular God or anything. What he taught was true wisdom, compassion, and the art of living a spiritual life in this world. So he taught that there is a degree of incompleteness, imperfection in our life if we do not have a higher transcendental ideal. So that incompleteness he called dukkha. So dukkha is translated into its English word as a grief, which is actually a very imperfect translation of the word. Because by the word dukkha, Buddha did not mean what we normally understand by the English word grief. See, if you have lost your money, you become grief-stricken. Some near and dear ones lost, we become grief-stricken. We lose our job, we become grief-stricken. That is not the kind of grief he was talking about. He was talking about a feeling of spiritual emptiness, even in the midst of all prosperity. Suppose you have a lot of money, wonderful job, big home, and all people, good people around, and everything wonderful. Still, if you feel a kind of inner emptiness, which is actually a sign of a higher refinement of our life and mind. If you feel that, that is called dukkha in Buddhist vocabulary. Not a grief as we understand in the English lexicon. It's a totally misleading, absolutely wrong, a terrible violence that we do against Buddha's teachings. If you understand the word dukkha as grief, it means a kind of inner fulfillment in spite of all material prosperities, which is possible only for a Lincoln or Gandhi or a Buddha or a Shankara. Great men, great women who have nothing to aspire for in this world, but aspiring for something transcendental. That aspiration is rooted in this divine discontent, divine dissatisfaction, which is called dukkha. So he used the word Chatvari Arya Satyani, 4 noble truths, which are the foundation of Buddhist philosophy. Later Buddhist philosophers, later between 2nd century BC and 4th century BC, 4 important schools of Buddhism evolved in India, mostly on Sanskrit, based on Sanskrit scriptures. They all wrote in Sanskrit language, but they do not really represent the original teachings of Buddha. Buddha did not teach Shunyavada, mindfulness. Buddha taught mindfulness, but what he called as Madhubattana Sutta, which is actually the origin, the Bible of mindfulness. It is called Sadhyupattana Sutta or Mahasadhyupattana Sutta, which comes Digha Nikaya, and the other one comes in Majjhima Nikaya. These are all Pali canonical works, which represent Buddha's long discourses on remaining in a state of perpetual awareness and witnessship. But that is not part of any elaborate philosophical system. Buddha taught this as a natural culmination of a person who reaches nirvana. What is nirvana? We'll find out. So 4 noble truths. First is, that is the noble truth of suffering. This noble truth of suffering means noble truth of this spiritual emptiness felt deeply within. Then the noble truth of the cause, origin of that dukkha, the noble truth of the cessation, disappearance, remedy for that dukkha. And then what is that remedy? The noble truth, which outlines 8 fundamental spiritual, moral, ethical disciplines. We call Ashtanga Yoga, Ashtanga Marga. That is the right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So right mindfulness is called Samyak Smriti. So the Sanskrit words are related to Pali languages. Samyak Drishti, Samyak Sankalpa, Samyak Vak, Samyak Karma, Samyak Ajiva, Samyak Vyayama, Samyak Smriti, Samyak Samadhi. Samyak Smriti, the 7th discipline, is what is now known as mindfulness. So in elaborating the Samyak Smriti, to remain in a state of proper mindfulness, proper awareness, minus entanglement. That is what mindfulness is all about. Awareness minus entanglement. It's called Samyak Smriti, the 7th discipline which leads you to nirvana. So that is actually the foundation of mindfulness meditation, which is becoming very popular these days. So it is found in 2 sutras, which were recollected and recorded in Pali language, Pali script, by Buddha's followers about 80 years after his passing away, in the first Buddhist council held in Rajagriha, which is very close to the capital city of Bihar state in India. Now it's a huge Buddhist tourist program is being developed in those places. So one is Satipattana Sutta, which comes in Majjhima Nikaya. The other is Mahasatipattana Sutta, which comes in Digha Nikaya. So this is the essence of it. So how do we get out of this dukkha? We get out of this dukkha by attaining nirvana. And how do we attain nirvana? By practicing these disciplines, that is, right word, that means right speech, right mindfulness, right effort, right conduct, and then right meditation, right contemplation, right vision, all that. So what is right? The point is, if you make use of our natural human faculties and activities, our natural involvement of the 5 senses of perception, eyes, ears, sense of touch, sense of smell, and so on, and our own senses of action, which we always use. If you give a spiritual direction to our everyday movements, everyday words, everyday activities, then it becomes right. In Sanskrit called samyak, or in Pali samma. Then we can be spiritual. That's the reason why Buddhism has become so popular, because very often established religions become so boring to modern people. And so much of a big labor, there is so much of an imposing, like a Hulk breathing heavily behind your back. So people don't want a huge, strong, muscular fellow holding a big stick in your hand, holding a big stick, wielding a big stick and speak smoothly. So we don't want such a big Hulk standing behind us, dictating you do this, you do that. We don't want that kind of a God. And what does it matter? And he has rules and regulations. If you obey, you go to a 5-star hotel, heaven. And if you don't obey, you are doomed to burn in this perpetual hellfire. We don't want such a Hulk, a dictator, a monster, a spiritual Hitler standing in front of us. We want somebody who will help us. Well, okay, fine. You are a housewife, you are a professor, you are a student, you are a teacher, all right. You study well. If you are a student, you look after your family very well, you do your very well, and you can be spiritual. You give up all hatred, you speak in the proper manner, you be compassionate towards others, you be humane towards others, and you can be spiritual. This is much more attractive, much more rational, and it makes much better sense. And it looks more humane. And it doesn't impose something heavy on our heads. So that's why Buddhism has got such a tremendous appeal for the modern world. People don't want to be dictated terms. This is an age of democracy. We don't want to live in an iron curtain or bamboo curtain, depending upon the curtain that it's made of. So that's why Buddha is so easily accessible. He speaks about living in this world in a way that brings you peace and that brings peace to others. So that's why you find a lot of compassion, humanity. That's why Vivekananda defined Buddha's contribution as the humanization of Vedantic principles. What Buddha did was, he did not put too much of emphasis on metaphysics and philosophy. What he did, he made it more humanistic. Humanistic in the spiritual sense, not in the capitalist humanism or socialist humanism or modern scientific humanism, nothing of the kind. Spiritual humanism, universal spiritual humanism. That's what Buddha preached. And to begin with, he says, there are 3 fires in our minds. That is desire or thirst, anger and delusion. And the first one is desire, trishna, he called it. Now, fire has a problem. You can cook your food in fire, but fire can also consume the house you live in. So it depends upon how we use this fire. So this should be the energy resources of our mind, body and intellect should be used for the good of our life and for the good of humanity. So the first parable I am going to discuss is the parable of the mustard seed. So it is a very important parable for the orthodox school of Buddhism. It's called Theravada Buddhism, which is very popular in countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, Cambodia, Thailand, all these countries. In contrast to the Mahayana Buddhism, which is more popular in countries like Japan, China, and so on. So the parable has got two parts. The first part is, there was a rich man who found his gold suddenly transformed into ashes. And he took to his bed and refused all food. What happened, Suddenly he found he was hoarding a huge quantity of gold. And one day he found this gold that he won't use for his own good and won't give anything to anybody. He was so stingy, so miserly, and so monstrous and cruel, and he wouldn't help anyone. He hoarded all his wealth. So one day he found all this has become ashes. So he lost his peace, lost his sleep, he refused all food. So a friend came and told him, "You did not make use of your wealth. That's why it has all become ashes. Now there is a way out. Listen to me. You spread mats in the bazaar. Pile up these ashes on those mats. So people, the pedestrians, will see mats and somebody sitting nearby with a heap of ashes. So he did that. And he pretended to be a trader selling ashes. And after some time, a young lady came. Her name was Kisa Gautami. So Gautami came and asked this man, "Why do you sit here with a pile of ashes on the mats?" The rich man replied, "Will you please hand me that gold and silver?" The lady was very poor, but she had some gold coins in her wallet, which she used for her own food, maybe to feed her own poor children. So this man said, rich man who had lost all his wealth because all his gold, hoarded gold, became ashes. He requested this poor woman, "Well, can you take some ashes from this mat?" This poor lady, who was using whatever little money she had to feed her own children, to help the neighbors, what she did, she put her hands on the ashes. So the ashes became gold. They returned to gold. Because she was using it. The other man was stingy. He had all these huge currency notes of this modern times, gold and diamonds. They all became ashes. But the poor lady, she was a good woman. She was, whatever little money she had, she was using it for her good and for the good of others. So when she put her hands on the heap of ashes, it returned to gold. Then this man thought, maybe this lady has some spiritual knowledge, and she could see the real worth of money. She knew how to make use of money. So money that we don't use for our good or for the good of others is as good as ashes. It's just a figure on the computer screen, nothing more. And we gloat over that. We say non-existent, imaginary, delusional concept of non-existent wealth. Just a computer digit figure on the screen, nothing more. When you buy a home, it becomes real. So then what happened, then this man said, well, she was a young lady, so she was a virtuous person, and so she was very happy. Now there is another part to this parable. This lady, Gautami, had only one son, and this son died, and she was grief-stricken. She had only one son, and she went to this rich man who had all his gold turned into ashes and who had interaction with her earlier. She went and told him, "My only son, he died." So she was weeping and crying. This man had heard of Buddha. So this man, by the time he had already become an enlightened person, this rich man, when he found that a virtuous but poor old lady could turn his ashes back to their original form, gold, then that experience, that sudden shocking revelation, had already the effect of a spiritual awakening in his heart. So this man had become a spiritually enlightened person. Not like Buddha, but he became more evolved. So he told her, "I can't give you a solution to your problem. I cannot console you, but I can direct you to somebody who can console you in a way that you will never be unhappy again. You will not weep again over the death of your lost son. So I cannot give the medicine for your child who died, but I know a doctor who can give medicine. And his name is Buddha. Go to him." So this lady who had lost her only son, came to Buddha and narrated her tragedy. Buddha answered, well, now I'm looking for a small quantity of mustard seed. And can you get it? Oh, she was very happy. Getting a small quantity of mustard seed is not a very big problem. Then, as she was about to depart in search of mustard seed, Buddha called her back and said, look here, there's one condition. You should get this mustard seed from a house where no one has lost a child, husband, parent, or friend. She thought it's not a very big problem. She will find out any number of houses from where she can procure a small quantity of mustard seed. From a house where nobody had died, no child, no husband, no wife, no parent, nobody has died. She thought it's a very, very easy thing. So she went from house to house and she asked for mustard seed. When she presented her condition, well, I want to make sure that nobody in your home has ever died. You never had this tragedy happening in your home. No child, no man, no woman, nobody has died. Then she couldn't find anyone because in every house, somebody had died sometime in the past. So she actually came back empty-handed. She sat down on the wayside and then finally she reached Buddha, and Buddha now told her, this is the condition. So you are not the only one in the world. So what Buddha says is, when we think that our problem is our own problem alone, it is a special problem reserved to us, and we are the only ones suffering in the world, then only suffering becomes unbearable. The moment you realize that the problem we are going through is not exclusively reserved for us, it happens to everyone, then you become a philosopher. From a weeping, crying, helpless woman, she became a philosopher. So Buddha said, the life of mortals in this world is troubled and brief and combined with pain. But there is not any means by which those that have been born can avoid dying. After reaching old age, there is death. And this problem of taking birth and dying, that is applicable to everything, every single phenomenon in this world. Whatever we consider to be precious, most valuable, most wonderful, will one day disappear. It doesn't mean that we should weep, but it means that we should be able to understand that this problem is not exclusively a single individual's problem, it's a universal problem. So, not from weeping, nor from grieving will anyone obtain peace of mind. On the contrary, his pain will be the greater and his body will suffer. He will make himself sick and pale, yet the dead are not saved by his lamentation. People pass away, and their fate after death will be according to the deeds. So then Buddha continues his sermon, talking about the dual link which explain the past, present, and future of human life cycles. It's called Praditya Samutpada, which is a unique explanation of the phenomenon of life, death, and rebirth. So once we understand this, we are able to look upon all problems from the angle of a philosopher. Well, you can get a deeper meaning of this if you read this along with the story, a story from Bhagavata Purana. It's again a very similar story. A king, his name was Chitraketu. his son died. His son was the only child of the royal parents, and he had already become young and proficient to take the responsibility of the kingdom. At that time, the previous night, the night before the coronation, he was to be declared the heir apparent, the future king of the country. This young man died, and parents began weeping and crying, and some sages came, tried to console them. They could not console them. Finally, another philosopher said, Narada came, and he knew that the parents could not be consoled. You know, if suppose Buddha had taught her in theory, well, you know, death is common to everyone. So your son has died. You cannot do anything about it. It is part of human life. The lady won't understand anything. Because philosophy doesn't connect with the human heart. It connects with the human heart only through human intellect. But the lady was so pain-stricken. So she won't be able to connect this philosophy with the real problem she was facing. But when Buddha asked her to go about looking for mustard seeds from a home where nobody had ever died, that experience of searching for a home where nobody had ever died, that experience taught her a great philosophy which books cannot teach. Similarly, this sage Narada, what he did, you know, the young man was dying, his dead body lay dead, and he brought life back to the dead body, and the young prince got up. Then Narada told him, just look here, your parents are crying and weeping, your ministers, you are the only son, so if you die, then the whole kingdom will be practically lawless. There will be no one to look after the responsibilities of the whole country after your father passes away. But then the son asked, what parents are you talking about? I had so many parents in the past, maybe thousands of pairs of parents. And not only, he said something else in the Bhagavata Purana. My father and mother, they were my children many times in the past. In this life, by sheer accident, they happened to be my parents. Bhagavata Purana, that mythological book, it elaborates on this point to drive home the idea of the accidental meeting in one junction in this life. So he says, well, I had so many life cycles in the past. These parents were members of my family in another way, another position. So I don't recognize them. I don't see them as something special. Thousands and thousands of pairs of parents I had in the past, just one of them. And I'm not able to see any connection between them. Immediately, the parents themselves were shocked, and then they were consoled. So when they really understood the truth of the transitoriness, the transience, the momentariness of life and death, then they had no problem. They could approach the whole reality from the angle of a philosopher. So also Gautami, this lady who had her only son who had passed away, was weeping and crying. Suddenly she discovered what she already knew but was not willing to understand at that time. Well, there is nobody, not a single household in this country where none had ever died in the past. So this problem is not my exclusive problem. It's a universal problem. When we consider it's our problem, then we worry. When we find it's a common heritage, then we don't worry too much. This is one parable. Another parable is much more interesting. That is actually related to Buddha himself. What it says is, we have within all of us this Buddhahood, this awakened. But we delude ourselves into thinking that we are not Buddhas. Buddha is already present in the granite block. When you remove all unnecessary parts, by chisel out all unnecessary parts, when the granite block, then the Buddha comes out. That's what a sculptor does when he tries to sculpture a statue of Buddha. The story is this. A poor little boy ran away from his father when he was very young. At that time, the house was very poor. The family was very poor. So he just ran away from his poverty-stricken household. And then after many years spending his time in so many different countries, he returned to his home one day. At that time, the family had become very rich. Now, at that time, his father died. His father lived in a big mansion. The father had already become very rich. So you have to remember the background. When the family was very poor, they were starving, the child ran away from his home. And after spending several years in different parts of the world, he returned. He came back to his home, and he could not recognize his own home because it had become a huge mansion. He could not recognize his own father because his father looked like a big nobleman. He had become very rich. But the father recognized the son. And he used to think, see, now I have a lot of wealth and I'm about to die, so I should get somebody. I have only one son and he's living somewhere away, and my wealth will practically disappear after my death. There is no one else to whom I can give the responsibility. At that time, the son was coming back after several years. He reached the gate of his own home, but it has become a wealthy man's mansion. So seeing the rich man, which is actually his own father, he could not recognize his father. But the father recognized the son. The son was standing in tatters. He looked very poor, very wretched looking youngster. And father looked like a nobleman because of his wealth. So he was wondering, is he a king or somebody? But the rich man recognized him. And he was very happy. He asked his servants to bring back his lost son. So the servants ran up to the poor son and told him, no, the nobleman is asking you to come. The son thought, oh, he's a big man in this country, and he's going to punish me because I'm a poor fellow. His servants also look quite intimidating, and they're calling me to the nobleman's presence. The nobleman did not tell his servants that this poor fellow was his own son. So the son did not know that it was his own father. And the messengers also did not know. They were just asking him, dragging him forcibly to the nobleman's presence. So when he came, what happened, when he was dragged back to his own father's presence, he was very much scared and frightened, and he shook off and he ran away, and he was lost again. Then the nobleman understood, really, the poor man is afraid of me. He doesn't recognize me as his father. So there is only one way out. He asked his servants and messengers to go incognito, disguised as beggars. Very similar in dress code to the young poor man himself. And came to him and these messengers told the poor man, you see, we can get you a good job in nobleman's home. That was his own father's home, which had become a big mansion now. You come back. So the son agreed. Because when the servants told him, we'll get you a good job in nobleman's home with a good salary. The poor fellow agreed because it was so natural to him. So he came back. And after some time, the father, whom the son did not recognize to be his father, told his son, okay, now you are working very hard as my servant in my home. You don't work so hard, and we'll give you a salary raise. So he made his son's life very comfortable, slowly by degrees. And one day when he was about to die, he revealed the truth to the whole public that this poor man who was working as the servant in his own home was actually his own son. And then the son was not frightened. Earlier the son was frightened. If you tell somebody tells you are Buddha, you'll be frightened or the man is crazy. But suppose somebody tells you, you practice meditation, you practice prayer, you read holy scriptures, you practice karma yoga, you do some spiritual practices, and then if somebody tells you, there is Buddha within you, you may make sense. So that's an important thing. So the father was so wise. He understood. When the messengers went and called him to come to his home, the poor, wretched-looking youngster who thought that this nobleman, for some unknown reason, was going to punish me. So he was frightened, he ran away. But when this nobleman's servants, messengers, went incognito, just like poor, wretched-looking servants, and asked him to come and told him they'll get him a job in the nobleman's home as a cook or maybe gardener, then the son was very happy because he was not frightened. Similarly, if somebody tells you one day you are Atman or Brahman, either you may think that man is crazy or you think you are crazy. On the other hand, if we slowly practice spiritual disciplines, which is called yama and niyama, this is one way. Otherwise, in the Viveka Chudamani called sadhana sadhushtayam, 4 important disciplines, and then listening and meditating on the meaning of scriptures, great spiritual ideas, and then contemplation. Like that, by slow degrees, if we practice spiritual disciplines, then if somebody tells you, well, you are not this physical body, there is something much more sublime in you, then you will understand. So when the son, as a servant, lived in his own father's home, the nobleman, rich man's home, for a long time, and slowly the nobleman became very compassionate, friendly with the servant, his own son, of course, and then the son became very friendly. Then last moment, nobleman told him, well, you are actually my own son. So like that, Buddha says, we should practice spiritual disciplines. We should not think a concept to be an experience. So there is some distance to be traveled from an idea to an experience, from a concept to an experience. And that distance to be traveled is called the period of spiritual evolution, spiritual progress. Well, there is another important parable. The wisdom and the profoundness of these parables are so mind-boggling. That's why, so one more parable I can perhaps read. That is, there was a mighty white elephant. So this story of an elephant, a big white elephant. And the elephant had an owner who owned this elephant. So one day the Mahau, the driver, the person who was training the elephant trainer, took him to a country inhabited exclusively by blind people. So you can imagine a huge, wonderful looking elephant being led by its trainer to a country where everyone was blind. So they all went to see this interesting phenomenon. So there are some people said it is a great thick snake because they have seen only, or they have felt only the trunk of the elephant. Some others thought it was like a smaller snake because they had seen only the tail of the elephant. And some others saw some other parts of the elephant. So accordingly, they came to their own conclusion as to what the object was like. So every one of these blind men was earnest, truthful, and sincere in his contentions. And each one of them thought that his or her view was correct according to his or her own experience. But the elephant trainer, who was not blind, knows that each one of them was wrong and each one of them was right. Wrong because they didn't get the full picture. Right because what they understood was not wrong. It was true because what they experienced was a small fraction of truth. So it was not the whole of truth. Like that, in spiritual life, very often we consider what we know to be the whole of truth. So here Buddha says, the master of the elephant, who knew the true nature, the true dimension of the elephant, its color, its size, its shape, is Buddha, is the enlightened one. And he has brought this white elephant of truth into the land of the blind. And there is no way for the blind people to get the correct picture of the elephant except listening to the sermons of the master of the elephant. Because he knows the elephant, its color, its shape, because he is not blind. Like that, anyone who takes refuge in Buddha will get the whole of truth. Others may catch the tail and think it's a small snake, may feel the trunk and may think it's a big, huge elephant. So huge snake, like that, no one can realize the full picture of truth, spiritual truth, unless he listens to the words of the enlightened one, Buddha. The only way for those who are blind to understand truth is to depend upon somebody who is not blind. And Buddha is the enlightened one, the awakened one. He is never blind. So those who are blind should slowly become awakened by practicing these four noble truths, that is the reality of dukkha, the cause of dukkha, and the remedy for dukkha, and also the way out, that is the eightfold disciplines. That is one way to make ourselves Buddhas. We can ourselves get awakened. So you can see the story, the early story. The nobleman, the rich man, suppose the rich man had called his long lost son to his household, made him sit in a big throne and tell him, well, you are actually my son. The poor fellow won't understand. He may be scared. He will run away. So what he did, he first invited him to work under him as a servant. And then slowly, by his own compassion, he gave the impression to his son that he is a nice person, he is a compassionate person, a humane person. So the son felt very comfortable in his own household. And then eventually, at the last moment, the rich man revealed his own identity and the identity of the son, then the son realized it. So there's a slow process of spiritual awakening. So anyway, we have already taken some time. So the greatness of Buddha was he could put his great, profound spiritual messages in the language of the common people and use simple stories related to our everyday life. And also from Buddha's parables, you get a picture of the socio-religious conditions of 6th century India. For example, there is one interesting story, I'm concluding with that. The story is that of a ritualist fire worshipper. The story is called Kashyapa. In Pali, it's called Kasapa. So he was a big Orthodox priest, and he thought he was the holiest man in the world. He believed not in philosophy, but in rituals, elaborate rituals. He didn't think about philosophy or higher transcendental ideas. So this man had a sacred fire. It was guarded by a dragon, the mythological story. And Buddha one day visited him. He was very respectful to Buddha. And he was concerned when Buddha had to leave the same room where the fire was preserved, the holy fire. And Buddha insisted that he should be accommodated in the same room where the holy fire was kept. Then the priest protested, the dragon, the serpent can bite you, can be harmful. Buddha said no. And he lived there, and the dragon became pacified. It was completely conquered. It lost its hatred, its anger. It became a refined creature. And next day, when the priest found out that his own serpent, dragon, it's a mythological story, but there is message behind the message, a story behind the story. The inner story is more profound. What it says is, rituals, all external practices, all elaborate external practices are okay, but they do not constitute the whole truth. They are only just kindergartens or primary schools, different preparatory stages towards the gradual unfoldment of the Buddha who is already present in all of us. So all these great ideas are put forward in the language of the common people. That's why he decided to speak not in Sanskrit but in the vernacular language that was prevalent in the country where he lived and preached. It's called Magadhi Prakrit. So this is the story of Buddha. Those of you who are interested, there are many such stories. Many of these stories can be found in the earlier Sanskrit works. Buddha was familiar with all the ancient scriptures and laws, So, but all these stories, when he interpreted, they assumed a special, unique spiritual significance. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.